Welcome back to another peaceful evening together. Tonight, we embark on a different kind of journey, one that winds through the fascinating territories of the human mind itself. As you settle into comfort, perhaps noticing the weight of your body against the surface beneath you, we'll explore the rich and intricate world of psychology, that noble science dedicated to understanding what makes us who we are. The word psychology itself carries a certain poetry, derived from the Greek psyche, meaning soul or mind, and logos, meaning study. It represents humanity's ancient quest to comprehend the invisible forces that shape our thoughts, feelings, and actions. For thousands of years, philosophers pondered the nature of consciousness, but it wasn't until the late 1800s that psychology emerged as a distinct scientific discipline, complete with laboratories, experiments, and systematic observations. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast landscape at twilight, when the world takes on that particular quality of stillness. Before you stretches an endless terrain of hills and valleys, rivers and forests, each representing different aspects of human experience. Some regions are well mapped, their features documented through decades of careful research. Others remain mysterious, their boundaries shifting like morning mist. This is the landscape of psychology, a domain as varied and complex as the human beings it seeks to understand. As you breathe slowly and steadily, consider that every thought passing through your mind right now, every sensation you're experiencing, every memory that surfaces unbidden, represents the subject matter of psychological science. The way you perceive these words, the manner in which you're processing their meaning, the subtle shifts in your emotional state as you listen, all of these phenomena fall within psychology's vast domain of inquiry. Tonight's exploration will carry us through several major territories within this landscape. We'll traverse the realm of cognitive psychology, where researchers study the invisible machinery of thought itself. We'll journey through developmental psychology, witnessing how human beings grow and change across the entire arc of life. We'll enter the intricate social world, examining how we influence and are influenced by those around us. We'll visit the healing practices of clinical psychology, understanding how psychological science helps those who struggle. We'll peer into the biological foundations of mind through neuroscience, and we'll ascend to the sunlit peaks of positive psychology, where researchers study human flourishing. Finally, we'll explore the patterns that make each individual unique through personality psychology. The beauty of this journey is that it requires nothing from you except gentle attention. You need not remember everything, need not take notes or prepare for an examination. Simply allow the information to wash over you like waves on a quiet shore, carrying you gradually toward rest and renewal. If your mind wanders, that's perfectly natural. If you drift towards sleep, that's exactly as it should be. The purpose of this exploration is not mastery, but companionship, a way of occupying your thoughts with something interesting and absorbing as your body and mind transition toward the restoration of sleep. So breathe deeply, settle in, and let us begin our unhurried tour through the remarkable science of psychology. The architecture of thought, exploring cognitive psychology. Picture a vast library, its shelves extending into dimness, filled with millions of books, documents, and scrolls. Now, imagine this library is alive, constantly reorganizing itself, creating new connections between distant volumes, sometimes misplacing items, occasionally inventing entirely new categories. This living, breathing archive represents your cognitive system, the collection of mental processes that allow you to think, remember, perceive, and reason about the world. Cognitive psychology emerged as a dominant force in the mid-20th century, challenging the prevailing behaviorist view that psychology should study only observable actions. Cognitive psychologists insisted that the mind itself, that invisible theater of thought, deserved scientific investigation. They developed clever experiments and sophisticated theories to understand how information flows through human consciousness, how we store and retrieve memories, how we solve problems, and how we make sense of the endless stream of sensory information bombarding us each moment. Let's begin with memory, perhaps the most studied aspect of cognition. Close your eyes for a moment and recall your breakfast this morning. Notice how that memory arrives, perhaps bringing with it sensory details, the taste of coffee or the texture of toast. This simple act of remembering involves an intricate dance of neural activity, a symphony of connections firing across your brain. Memory is not a single thing, but rather a collection of different systems working in concert. Short-term memory, sometimes called working memory, serves as a temporary workspace where you hold information for immediate use. Right now, as you listen to these words, your working memory is active, holding the beginning of this sentence while you process its conclusion, allowing you to grasp the complete meaning. Research suggests that this system can hold roughly 5 to 9 items at once, though this number varies between individuals and depends on the nature of the information. Working memory isn't just passive storage. Think of it as a mental workbench, where you manipulate information, solve problems, and make decisions. When you calculate a tip at a restaurant, remember a phone number long enough to dial it, or follow a set of directions, you're using working memory. This system has several components. The phonological loop handles verbal and acoustic information, like when you repeat a phone number to yourself. The visuospatial sketchpad manages visual and spatial information, allowing you to mentally rotate objects or remember where you parked your car. A central executive coordinates these systems, deciding where to allocate attention and controlling the flow of information. But working memory is fleeting, its contents disappearing within seconds unless actively maintained. For information to persist beyond this brief window, it must be transferred to long-term memory, a seemingly limitless storehouse of everything you've ever learned, experienced, or imagined. Unlike short-term memory's narrow bottleneck, long-term memory appears to have virtually infinite capacity. You can learn new information throughout your life without running out of space, though accessing specific memories may become more difficult as the archive grows larger. Long-term memory itself divides into several categories. Explicit memory, also called declarative memory, contains information you can consciously recall and describe. This includes episodic memory, your personal autobiography of specific events and experiences, like your first day of school or last summer's vacation. It also includes semantic memory, your general knowledge about the world, facts like the capital of France or the meaning of democracy. These two types of explicit memory feel different when you access them. Episodic memories have a quality of mental time travel. You re-experience the past. Semantic memories feel more like consulting an internal encyclopedia. Implicit memory, by contrast, operates largely outside conscious awareness. This system stores skills and procedures, the how-to knowledge that allows you to ride a bicycle, tie your shoes, or type on a keyboard. Once learned, these procedural memories become automatic, executing smoothly without requiring conscious attention. In fact, trying to consciously monitor an automatic skill often disrupts performance. Athletes call this paralysis by analysis, the way overthinking a golf swing or tennis serve can cause it to fall apart. The process of forming memories, called encoding, determines whether information makes it into long-term storage. Simply exposing yourself to information isn't enough. Effective encoding requires attention, elaboration, and organization. The depth of processing matters tremendously. If you merely read words without thinking about their meaning, you'll remember little. But if you relate new information to existing knowledge, generate examples, ask questions, or explain concepts in your own words, you create richer, more durable memory traces. Retrieval, the process of accessing stored information, is equally fascinating. Memories aren't retrieved whole and intact, like pulling a book from a shelf. Instead, retrieval is reconstructive, assembling fragments of information into a coherent whole. This reconstruction process makes memory vulnerable to distortion and error. Every time you recall an event, You slightly modify the memory, potentially introducing new details or losing old ones. Eyewitness testimony, once considered highly reliable in legal settings, is now understood to be surprisingly fallible due to these reconstructive processes. Context plays a powerful role in memory. Information learned in one environment is often easier to recall in that same environment, a phenomenon called context-dependent memory. Studying for an exam in the same room where you'll take it can boost performance. Even internal states matter. If you learned something while happy, you might recall it more easily when happy again, a pattern called state-dependent memory. Forgetting, far from being a failure of memory, serves important functions. Imagine if you remembered every trivial detail of every moment of your life. The sheer volume of irrelevant information would overwhelm your cognitive system. Forgetting filters out the noise, allowing important information to stand out. Some forgetting occurs because memory traces decay over time without use. Other forgetting results from interference, when similar memories compete for retrieval. Learning new material can interfere with old material, and old material can interfere with learning new information. Beyond memory, cognitive psychology explores attention, the spotlight of consciousness that illuminates some information while leaving the rest in shadow. Attention is selective. Right now, you're focused on these words, but countless other stimuli surround you. The temperature of the room, the pressure of your body against the bed, distant sounds, your own breathing. These stimuli exist in the background unless you direct attention toward them. Attention has limits. You cannot fully attend to multiple complex tasks simultaneously. What feels like multitasking is usually rapid switching between tasks, a process that incurs costs in terms of time and accuracy. Divided attention works reasonably well for highly automatic tasks. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, but breaks down when both tasks demand significant cognitive resources. Trying to have a meaningful conversation while composing an email typically produces poor results in both domains. Perception, closely related to attention, involves interpreting sensory information to construct your experience of reality. Perception isn't passive reception, but active construction. Your brain doesn't simply record what's out there like a camera. Instead, it uses incoming sensory data combined with expectations, prior knowledge, and context to build a model of the world. This constructive process normally serves you well, allowing rapid, efficient perception. But it also makes you vulnerable to illusions and misperceptions when your expectations don't match reality. Consider visual perception, probably the most studied sensory system. Light enters your eyes, striking the retina and triggering neural signals that travel to the visual cortex. But these signals carry only fragmentary information, patterns of light and dark, edges and contours. Your brain transforms this fragmentary input into your rich, detailed experience of a three-dimensional world filled with objects, colors, and motion. The brain fills in gaps, makes assumptions, and applies rules to construct this perceptual experience. Gestalt psychologists, working in the early 20th century, discovered many principles governing perceptual organization. Your brain automatically groups stimuli that are close together, similar in appearance, or connected by smooth contours. It perceives figures as separate from backgrounds. It completes incomplete patterns. These organizing principles operate automatically and unconsciously, shaping your perceptual experience before you're even aware of seeing anything. Top-down processing, where expectations and knowledge influence perception, interacts with bottom-up processing, where perception builds from sensory features. When you read, top-down processing allows you to recognize words even when individual letters are ambiguous. When you listen to speech in a noisy environment, top-down processing fills in missing or unclear sounds based on context. These processes usually help, but they can also fool you, as when you hear lyrics differently than they're actually sung or see faces in clouds. Cognitive psychology also examines thinking itself. the manipulation of mental representations to solve problems, make decisions, and reason about possibilities. Human thinking employs both logical, systematic processes and intuitive, rapid shortcuts called heuristics. Heuristics generally work well, allowing quick decisions with minimal effort, but they can lead to systematic errors and biases. The availability heuristic judges frequency or probability based on how easily examples come to mind. If you can quickly recall instances of something, you estimate it as common. This often works. Frequent events are generally more memorable. But vivid, dramatic, or recent events also come to mind easily, even if they're rare. People overestimate the frequency of dramatic events like plane crashes or shark attacks because these incidents receive heavy media coverage, making them easily recalled. The representativeness heuristic judges probability based on similarity to a prototype. If something resembles your mental image of a category, you judge it likely to belong to that category. This can lead to ignoring relevant statistical information. People judge that someone who is quiet, introverted, and detail-oriented is more likely to be a librarian than a farmer, even though farmers vastly outnumber librarians because the description matches their librarian stereotype. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms existing beliefs while discounting contradictory evidence, shapes how people form and maintain convictions. Once you adopt a belief, you unconsciously filter subsequent information through that lens, strengthening confidence in the belief regardless of its accuracy. This bias makes changing minds remarkably difficult, even when confronted with compelling counter-evidence. Framing effects demonstrate how the presentation of information influences decisions. The same choice presented in different ways, emphasizing gains versus losses, or framing options positively versus negatively, produces different preferences. These framing effects reveal that decisions aren't based purely on objective analysis, but are influenced by how information is packaged and presented. Cognitive psychology has revealed that human thinking, while remarkably powerful and flexible, operates through processes that are sometimes flawed, biased, and irrational. Understanding these processes doesn't make us perfect thinkers, but it can help us recognize our limitations and develop strategies to think more effectively. It reminds us that the mind, marvelous as it is, constructs reality through processes that are fascinating, intricate, and occasionally wonderfully strange. The unfolding self, developmental psychology and the journey of growth. Imagine watching time-lapse photography of a flower blooming, the tightly closed bud gradually unfurling into full blossom, each stage revealing new structures and possibilities. Human development resembles this process, though infinitely more complex. From the moment of conception to the final breath of life, human beings undergo continuous transformation, growing, learning, and changing in predictable yet individually unique patterns. Developmental psychology studies this magnificent unfolding, seeking to understand how and why people change across the lifespan. Early developmental psychologists focused primarily on childhood, viewing adulthood as a period of relative stability. Modern researchers recognize that development continues from conception to death, with each phase of life presenting distinct challenges, opportunities, and transformations. Perhaps no figure looms larger in developmental psychology than Jean Piaget, the Swiss psychologist who revolutionized understanding of cognitive development in children. Piaget proposed that children don't simply know less than adults, they think differently. Through careful observation of his own children and systematic experiments with many others, Piaget identified distinct stages of cognitive development, each characterized by qualitatively different ways of understanding the world. The sensorimotor stage, spanning birth to roughly 2 years, represents the period when infants learn about their world primarily through sensory experience and motor action. A newborn's world is a blooming, buzzing confusion of unconnected sensations. Through countless interactions with objects and people, infants gradually construct an understanding of reality. One of the most important achievements during this stage is object permanence, the understanding that objects continue to exist even when out of sight. Before developing object permanence, an infant behaves as if hidden objects cease to exist. Once this concept emerges, typically around 8 to 10 months, the infant will search for hidden objects, demonstrating a fundamental shift in their model of reality. The pre-operational stage, from roughly 2 to 7 years, emerges as language develops, allowing children to represent the world symbolically. A child in this stage can use words to represent objects, engage in pretend play, and think about things not immediately present. However, their thinking remains limited in important ways. Pre-operational children are egocentric, not in the sense of being selfish, but in being unable to take another person's perspective. They struggle with conservation tasks, failing to understand that quantities remain the same despite changes in appearance. Pour water from a short, wide glass into a tall, thin glass, and a pre-operational child will insist you now have more water because the level is higher. The concrete operational stage, from about 7 to 11 years, brings more logical thinking, but limited to concrete, tangible situations. Children master conservation, understand reversibility, and can mentally organize and classify objects in systematic ways. They can solve logical problems involving objects they can see or manipulate, but struggle with abstract, hypothetical reasoning. The formal operational stage, emerging around age 11 or 12 and continuing into adulthood, marks the arrival of abstract thinking. Adolescents and adults can reason about hypothetical situations, think systematically about all logical possibilities, and understand abstract concepts like justice, freedom, or infinity. Not everyone reaches this stage fully, and even those who do don't use formal operational thinking in all domains. While Piaget's stage theory profoundly influenced developmental psychology, subsequent research has refined and challenged aspects of his framework. Modern researchers recognize that cognitive development is more variable and context-dependent than Piaget suggested. Children often demonstrate competencies earlier than Piaget believed, if tasks are simplified or made more relevant. Development doesn't proceed through discrete stages, but often shows gradual, continuous change. Individual children develop at different rates, influenced by cultural contexts, education, and individual differences. Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist working around the same time as Piaget, offered a different perspective on development, emphasizing social and cultural influences. Vygotsky argued that cognitive development occurs primarily through social interaction. Children learn by collaborating with more skilled others, gradually internalizing knowledge and skills initially demonstrated by others. The zone of proximal development, one of Vygotsky's key concepts, represents the gap between what a child can do independently and what they can accomplish with guidance. Effective teaching targets this zone, providing support that helps children reach just beyond their current capabilities. Erikson expanded developmental psychology beyond cognitive growth, proposing a stage theory of psychosocial development spanning the entire lifespan. Each of Erikson's 8 stages presents a developmental crisis or challenge that must be resolved for healthy psychological growth. The resolution of each crisis isn't all or nothing, but exists on a continuum, with most people achieving some balance between the opposing tendencies. In infancy, the crisis of trust versus mistrust emerges. Infants who receive consistent, responsive care develop basic trust in the world and in other people. Those whose needs are met inconsistently or neglectfully may develop mistrust, a suspicious stance toward the world that can color later relationships. Early childhood brings autonomy versus shame and doubt. As toddlers develop motor skills and language, they begin asserting independence. Parents who support appropriate autonomy while providing necessary guidance help children develop confidence. Overly controlling or harshly critical parents may instill shame and doubt about the child's abilities. The preschool years present initiative versus guilt. Children become capable of planning and carrying out activities. If their initiatives are encouraged, children develop confidence in their leadership abilities. If initiatives are dismissed or punished, children may develop guilt about natural desires and initiative. School age brings industry versus inferiority. Children compare themselves to peers, developing either competence in industry through mastery of skills or feelings of inferiority if they repeatedly fail or receive negative feedback. Adolescence features the famous identity versus role confusion crisis. Teenagers explore different roles, beliefs, and relationships, working toward a coherent sense of identity. Successfully resolving this crisis produces a firm sense of who you are. Failure to resolve it results in role confusion, uncertainty about identity and direction in life. Young adulthood presents intimacy versus isolation. Having developed identity, young adults face the challenge of forming deep, intimate relationships without losing themselves. Success produces satisfying, intimate relationships. Failure results in loneliness and isolation. Middle adulthood brings generativity versus stagnation. Generativity involves contributing to future generations through parenting, teaching, mentoring, or creative work. Those who fail to find meaningful ways to contribute may experience stagnation, a sense of not growing or producing anything of lasting value. Finally, late adulthood features integrity versus despair. Looking back on life, older adults who feel their life has been meaningful and well lived develop integrity, a sense of wholeness and acceptance. Those filled with regrets, feeling their life was wasted or misdirected, experience despair. Erikson's theory reminds us that psychological development doesn't end with childhood, but continues throughout life, with each stage building on earlier resolutions and preparing for future challenges. The beauty of his framework is its acknowledgement that life continually presents new opportunities for growth, change, and transformation. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and extended by Mary Ainsworth, revolutionized understanding of early relationships and their lasting impact. Bowlby, drawing on ethology and evolutionary theory, proposed that infants are biologically predisposed to form attachments to caregivers. These attachments served evolutionary functions, keeping vulnerable infants close to protectors and providers. But attachments do more than ensure physical survival. They provide the foundation for emotional regulation, self-concept, and later relationships. Ainsworth's research revealed different patterns of attachment. Securely attached infants use caregivers as a secure base for exploration, becoming distressed when the caregiver leaves, but quickly comforted when they return. These children have learned that their caregivers are reliably available and responsive. Insecurely attached infants show different patterns. Some become anxious, ambivalent, intensely distressed by separation, but difficult to comfort upon reunion, reflecting inconsistent caregiving. Others develop avoidant attachment, showing little distress at separation and avoiding the caregiver upon return, often a response to consistently unavailable or rejecting caregiving. A fourth pattern, disorganized attachment, appears in children who have experienced frightening or traumatic caregiving, showing confused, contradictory behaviors suggesting they lack coherent strategies for seeking comfort. These early attachment patterns tend to persist, influencing later relationships and emotional functioning. Securely attached children typically become adults who form satisfying intimate relationships, trust others appropriately, and regulate emotions effectively. Insecurely attached children may struggle with relationships, either becoming overly clingy and anxious or distant and avoidant. However, attachment patterns aren't fixed destinies. Later positive relationships can repair insecure attachment, and secure attachment can be disrupted by trauma or chronic stress. The nature-nurture debate, that ancient question of whether heredity or environment matters more for development, has been largely resolved in favor of recognizing that both factors interact in complex ways throughout development. Genes influence development by creating predispositions and setting boundaries, but environmental factors determine how those genetic potentials are expressed. A child may inherit genetic predisposition toward musical ability, but without exposure to music and opportunities for training, that potential remains unrealized. Modern developmental science increasingly recognizes critical and sensitive periods when particular experiences have especially powerful effects on development. Language acquisition, for instance, occurs most readily during childhood. Children exposed to language during this sensitive period typically become fluent speakers. Those deprived of language exposure during childhood, as in tragic cases of severe neglect, rarely achieve full language competence even with intensive later training. The brain's plasticity, its ability to be shaped by experience, is greatest during these sensitive periods, though it never disappears entirely. Development is multidimensional, occurring simultaneously across physical, cognitive, emotional, and social domains. These domains influence each other in intricate ways. Physical maturation enables new cognitive abilities. Cognitive advances allow more sophisticated social interactions. Emotional development affects learning and relationships. Understanding any aspect of development requires considering these multiple, interacting dimensions. As we drift towards sleep, contemplating this grand arc of human development, we might reflect on our own journey, the infant we were, the child we remember being, the adolescent navigating identity, the adult we've become. Each stage left its mark, building on what came before while pointing toward what comes next. Development is both universal, following general patterns common to all humans, and uniquely individual, shaped by particular genes, specific environments, and personal choices. This combination of universality and uniqueness makes human development endlessly fascinating, a story that is both everyone's story and no one else's story but your own. The web of human connection, social psychology, and the power of others. Even in solitude, we remain fundamentally social creatures. The people around us, both present and imagined, shape our thoughts, feelings, and actions in profound and often unconscious ways. Social psychology explores this intricate web of human connection, asking how our social environment influences individual behavior and how individuals in turn shape their social worlds. Consider a simple question. Would you knowingly give a wrong answer to an obvious question if everyone around you gave that same wrong answer? Most people confidently insist they would not, that their perception and judgment are independent of others' opinions. Yet one of social psychology's most famous experiments suggests otherwise. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch conducted a deceptively simple study. Participants believed they were taking part in a vision test. Seated with several other participants, they viewed lines of different lengths and indicated which comparison line matched a standard line. The task was trivial. Any person with normal vision could easily identify the correct match, but the other participants were actually confederates, actors working with the experimenter. On certain trials, these confederates unanimously chose an obviously incorrect answer. What would the real participant do? Remarkably, about 76% of participants conformed to the incorrect group answer at least once. Across all trials, participants conformed about 1/3 of the time, giving answers they knew to be wrong simply because everyone else gave those answers. Interviews afterward revealed that most conforming participants knew the group answer was wrong. They conformed anyway, afraid of standing out, being ridiculed, or seeming incompetent. A minority genuinely doubted their own perception, trusting the group over their own eyes. This study illuminates two types of social influence. Normative social influence occurs when people conform to be liked, accepted, or to avoid disapproval. Most Asch participants experienced normative influence, going along with the group to fit in. Informational social influence occurs when people conform because they believe the group has accurate information. This type of influence becomes stronger in ambiguous situations where the correct answer is unclear. If you're uncertain, looking to others for guidance makes sense, even if those others are equally uncertain. Conformity isn't always negative. It provides social glue, allowing groups to function smoothly. Imagine if no one ever followed social norms. Traffic would be chaos. Conversations would be impossible. Cooperation would fail. Moderate conformity creates predictability and coordination. Problems arise when conformity leads people to violate their values, harm others, or suppress important dissent. While conformity involves adjusting to group pressure, obedience involves following direct commands from authority figures. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments, conducted in the early 1960s, explored how far people would go in obeying authorities' orders to harm another person. Participants believed they were part of a learning experiment. They were assigned the role of teacher, while another person, actually a confederate, became the learner. The teacher's job was to administer electric shocks to the learner whenever they gave wrong answers, increasing shock intensity with each error. The shock generator showed labels ranging from slight shock to danger, severe shock, to ominous XXX at the highest level. The learner, strapped into a chair in another room, would pound on the wall and cry out in pain, eventually falling ominously silent at the highest shock levels. No real shocks were administered, but teachers believed they were genuine. An authoritative experimenter in a lab coat stood nearby, urging them to continue whenever they hesitated. How many people in this situation would deliver what they believed to be potentially lethal shocks simply because an authority figure told them to? Before conducting the study, Milgram asked psychiatrists, students, and ordinary people to predict results. Most estimated that virtually no one would administer the highest shocks. Perhaps one person in 1,000, they suggested, a sadistic outlier, would go all the way. The actual results shocked everyone, including Milgram himself. 65% of participants administered the maximum shock level, while most showed signs of distress, sweating, trembling, arguing with the experimenter. They ultimately obeyed. What explains such troubling obedience? Several factors emerged. Participants trusted the authority of science and the prestigious university setting. The experimenter appeared confident and legitimate. Participants had agreed to participate, creating commitment. The shock levels increased gradually, making it difficult to identify a clear point to stop. Participants felt removed from directly harming the learner. The experimenter took responsibility. The situation was novel and ambiguous, with no clear norms for behavior. Milgram's research generated fierce ethical debates. Critics argued that subjecting participants to such stress was unethical, even if no actual harm occurred. The experiments would not be permitted today under current ethical guidelines. Yet they revealed something disturbing about human nature under certain conditions. Ordinary people will commit harmful acts when ordered by authority, not because they're inherently evil, but because situational pressures override personal values. These studies underscore a fundamental principle of social psychology. Situations matter enormously. Understanding behavior requires looking beyond individual personalities to social contexts, how situations constrain choices, create pressures, and channel behavior in predictable directions. The fundamental attribution error describes the tendency to overestimate personality and underestimate situation when explaining others' behavior. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you think, "What a jerk," rather than, "Maybe they're rushing to the hospital." When you cut someone off, you blame the situation. This bias colors our understanding of behavior, leading us to misjudge people and situations. Social psychology also explores attitudes, those evaluations of people, objects, or ideas that influence our behavior. Attitudes have cognitive, affective, and behavioral components. The cognitive component involves beliefs. The affective component involves feelings. and the behavioral component involves actions. These components usually align, but not always. You might believe smoking is harmful, feel disgusted by it, yet still smoke, an inconsistency that creates psychological discomfort. Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory addresses this discomfort. Dissonance, an unpleasant state of psychological tension, arises when you hold contradictory beliefs or when your behavior contradicts your attitudes. People are motivated to reduce dissonance, typically by changing attitudes, to match behavior rather than the harder route of changing behavior to match attitudes. If you smoke, despite believing it's harmful, you might convince yourself that smoking isn't really that dangerous, that you won't smoke long enough to experience harm, or that other health behaviors compensate for smoking. These rationalizations reduce dissonance, allowing you to smoke without unbearable psychological tension. Persuasion, the process of changing attitudes, has fascinated researchers for decades. The elaboration likelihood model distinguishes two routes to persuasion. The central route involves careful, thoughtful consideration of persuasive arguments. When motivated and able to think carefully, people process message content systematically, evaluating evidence and logic. Attitudes changed through the central route tend to be strong, resistant to counter-persuasion, and predictive of behavior. The peripheral route operates when people lack motivation or ability for careful thought. Here, superficial cues matter more than argument quality. Source attractiveness, number of arguments regardless of strength, emotional appeals, and catchy slogans influence attitudes formed through the peripheral route. These attitudes tend to be weaker, more susceptible to change, and less predictive of behavior. Social influence also operates at the group level. Groups develop their own dynamics, patterns of interaction that can enhance or impair decision-making and performance. Groupthink, identified by Irving Janis, describes situations where group cohesion and pressure for conformity suppress critical thinking and realistic appraisal of alternatives. Highly cohesive groups, isolated from outside information, with directive leaders, may make poor decisions because members suppress doubts, self-censor dissenting views, and create an illusion of unanimity. Historical fiascos, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to the Challenger disaster, have been attributed partly to groupthink. Social loafing, the tendency to exert less effort when working collectively than when working alone, reveals a darker side of group dynamics. When individual contributions can't be identified, people often slack off, counting on others to carry the load. This tendency varies across cultures, being stronger in individualistic Western societies than in collectivistic societies where group harmony and collective success carry greater weight. Yet groups can also enhance performance. Social facilitation describes improved performance on well-learned tasks when others are present. The presence of others arousing physiological arousal that energizes dominant responses. For simple or well-practiced tasks, dominant responses are typically correct, so performance improves. For complex or novel tasks, dominant responses are often errors, so performance suffers. Prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination represent some of social psychology's most socially important topics. Prejudice refers to negative attitudes toward group members based solely on their group membership. Stereotypes are beliefs about characteristics of group members. Discrimination involves negative actions toward group members. These three don't always occur together. You might hold stereotype beliefs without prejudice or discrimination. You might discriminate without conscious prejudice, if social pressures demand it. Understanding prejudice requires examining multiple levels. Personality factors play a role. Some individuals, raised in authoritarian environments emphasizing obedience and social hierarchy, develop personalities prone to prejudice. Cognitive factors matter too. Stereotyping simplifies a complex social world, allowing quick judgments with minimal cognitive effort. The cost of this efficiency is accuracy. Stereotypes exaggerate differences between groups while minimizing variation within groups. Social identity theory suggests that people derive self-esteem partly from group memberships. To maintain positive social identity, they favor their own groups and denigrate outgroups, even when group membership is arbitrary and meaningless. Reducing prejudice requires sustained effort at multiple levels. Contact between groups can reduce prejudice, but only under specific conditions. Groups must have equal status, work toward common goals, receive institutional support, and have opportunities for personal interaction. Simple exposure without these conditions may actually increase prejudice by confirming stereotypes. As our eyes grow heavy and our thoughts slow, we might reflect on this profound truth. We are not isolated individuals, but nodes in a vast social network, constantly influenced by and influencing those around us. The web of human connection shapes us in ways we rarely acknowledge, guiding our perceptions, attitudes, and actions through subtle pressures and invisible forces. Understanding these social influences doesn't free us from them. We remain social creatures. But it allows us to recognize how situations shape behavior, to resist inappropriate pressures, and to create social environments that bring out the best rather than the worst in human nature. The healing arts, clinical psychology, and the path to wellness. In a quiet room somewhere, a person sits across from another, sharing fears, sorrows, or confusions that feel too heavy to carry alone. The listener responds with attentiveness, empathy, and expertise, helping to untangle psychological knots, heal old wounds, and discover new ways of being. This is the work of clinical psychology, the application of psychological science to understanding, preventing, and treating mental health difficulties. Clinical psychology emerged in the early 20th century, initially focused on testing and assessment. Following World War II, the field expanded dramatically as returning soldiers needed treatment for psychological trauma. Today, clinical psychology encompasses assessment, diagnosis, treatment, prevention, and research related to mental health and psychological functioning. Mental health difficulties exist on a continuum from occasional distress, a normal part of human experience, to severe, disabling disorders that profoundly impair functioning. The boundary between normal struggles and diagnosable disorders isn't always clear. Diagnostic systems, like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, provide criteria for identifying specific conditions, but these systems face criticism for potentially pathologizing normal variation and failing to capture the dimensional nature of psychological difficulties. Depression, one of the most common mental health concerns, illustrates the complexity of distinguishing normal from pathological. Everyone feels sad sometimes. Sadness in response to loss or disappointment is normal and adaptive, but major depression involves pervasive sadness or loss of interest lasting at least 2 weeks, accompanied by changes in sleep, appetite, energy, concentration, and self-worth. Depression causes significant distress and impairs functioning at work, school, or in relationships. Unlike normal sadness, which diminishes as circumstances improve, depression persists even when external circumstances are good. Anxiety disorders, another common category, similarly exist on a continuum. Everyone experiences anxiety in threatening situations. Anxiety alerts us to danger, preparing for fight or flight. But anxiety disorders involve excessive worry, fear, or avoidance disproportionate to actual threat. Generalized anxiety disorder produces chronic, uncontrollable worry about everyday matters. Panic disorder involves unexpected panic attacks, intense surges of fear, accompanied by physical symptoms like racing heart, sweating, and feeling of impending doom. Social anxiety disorder creates intense fear of social situations where one might be judged or embarrassed. Specific phobias produce irrational, excessive fear of particular objects or situations. Psychological treatments aim to alleviate suffering, reduce symptoms, improve functioning, and enhance well-being. Multiple therapeutic approaches exist, each based on different theories about what causes psychological difficulties and how change occurs. Cognitive behavioral therapy, perhaps the most extensively researched approach, combines insights from cognitive and behavioral psychology. The cognitive component recognizes that thoughts influence emotions and behavior. Psychological difficulties often involve distorted, irrational thinking patterns. Depression features negative automatic thoughts about self, world, and future. Anxiety involves catastrophic thinking and overestimation of danger. CBT helps clients identify these problematic thought patterns, examine evidence for and against them, and develop more balanced, realistic thinking. The behavioral component recognizes that behavior patterns maintain psychological difficulties. Avoidance, for instance, maintains anxiety. If you fear social situations and avoid them, you never learn that your fears are exaggerated. Avoidance provides short-term relief, but strengthens fear in the long run. CBT uses behavioral techniques like exposure therapy, gradually confronting feared situations in a controlled, systematic way, allowing anxiety to decrease naturally through habituation. CBT is structured, time-limited, focused on present difficulties, and emphasizes skills and homework between sessions. Research demonstrates CBT's effectiveness for numerous conditions, including depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, and insomnia. CBT doesn't work for everyone or for all problems, but it represents a robust, evidence-based treatment option. Psychodynamic approaches, descendants of Freud's psychoanalysis, emphasize unconscious processes, early experiences, and relationship patterns. While classical psychoanalysis, with its emphasis on childhood sexuality and free association, has waned in popularity, modern psychodynamic therapy remains influential. These approaches assume that current difficulties reflect unresolved conflicts and unconscious patterns originating in early relationships. Bringing these patterns into awareness through exploring dreams, free associations, and the therapeutic relationship itself promotes insight and change. The therapeutic relationship holds central importance in psychodynamic approaches. Transference, the tendency to unconsciously redirect feelings about important early figures onto the therapist, provides a window into relationship patterns. By exploring how clients relate to the therapist, patterns that create difficulties in other relationships can be identified and worked through. Modern psychodynamic therapy tends to be briefer and more focused than classical psychoanalysis, but maintains emphasis on insight, unconscious processes, and relational patterns. Humanistic approaches, including person-centered therapy developed by Carl Rogers, emphasize human potential, personal growth, and subjective experience. These approaches reject the medical model of mental illness, viewing psychological difficulties as blocks to self-actualization rather than diseases requiring cure. Person-centered therapy provides a supportive, non-directive environment where clients can explore feelings and experiences without judgment. The therapist offers unconditional positive regard, genuine empathy, and congruence, authenticity, and transparency. This accepting relationship, Rogers believed, allows clients to reconnect with their true selves and move toward growth and self-actualization. Mindfulness-based therapies integrate Buddhist contemplative practices with Western psychology. These approaches teach clients to observe thoughts and feelings without judgment, cultivating awareness of present moment experience. Rather than trying to change or eliminate negative thoughts, mindfulness encourages a different relationship with thoughts, seeing them as mental events rather than truths about reality. Research suggests mindfulness-based interventions effectively prevent depression relapse and reduce anxiety. Integrative approaches combine elements from multiple therapeutic traditions. Many contemporary therapists describe themselves as eclectic, drawing techniques from different approaches based on client needs rather than adhering rigidly to one model. This flexibility recognizes that different people benefit from different approaches, and even within a single person, different issues might respond better to different interventions. Beyond individual therapy, other treatment modalities serve important functions. Group therapy allows people facing similar difficulties to support each other, share experiences, and learn from others' struggles and successes. Groups provide opportunities to practice social skills in a safe environment and break isolation. Family therapy views problems as residing not within individuals, but within family systems and patterns of interaction. By helping families communicate more effectively and restructure dysfunctional patterns, family therapy can resolve difficulties that individual therapy might miss. Psychiatric medications play important roles in mental health treatment. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, mood stabilizers, and antipsychotics can be highly effective, especially for severe disorders. Medication works best combined with therapy for many conditions, addressing both biological and psychological aspects of difficulties. The relationship between therapy and medication is complementary, not competitive. Both tools have their place in the treatment toolbox. The effectiveness of therapy has been demonstrated across thousands of research studies. While different approaches emphasize different techniques, outcome research suggests that various legitimate therapies produce roughly similar results. A finding called the dodo bird verdict, after the dodo bird in Alice in Wonderland, who declared that everybody has won and all must have prizes. This doesn't mean all approaches are identical, but that common factors shared across approaches, like the therapeutic relationship, hope, opportunity to express feelings, and development of coping strategies, account for much of therapy's effectiveness. The therapeutic relationship itself emerges as perhaps the most important common factor. Research consistently shows that the quality of the relationship between therapist and client predicts treatment outcomes better than specific techniques employed. A warm, empathic, collaborative relationship provides the foundation for effective treatment, regardless of theoretical orientation. Prevention represents another crucial aspect of clinical psychology. Rather than waiting until problems become severe, preventive interventions can help people develop coping skills, resilience, and healthy functioning before difficulties arise. School-based programs teaching emotional regulation and social skills, workplace stress management programs, and community outreach efforts all represent preventive approaches that can reduce the burden of mental health difficulties. As we drift deeper into relaxation, we might hold gratitude for the healers who dedicate their careers to alleviating psychological suffering, for the researchers who work to understand what helps and what doesn't, and for the courage of those who seek help when struggling. The healing arts remind us that psychological pain, while private and invisible, is real and worthy of treatment, that help is available, and that recovery, growth, and transformation remain possible even in the darkest moments. The plastic brain, neuroscience, and the capacity for change. Imagine holding a 3-pound universe in your hands, a wrinkled greyish mass that seems unremarkable, almost gelatinous. Yet this unimpressive-looking organ generates every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've felt, every memory you cherish. It creates your sense of self, your consciousness, your very being. This is the human brain, perhaps the most complex structure in the known universe, containing roughly 86 billion neurons and trillions of connections. For decades, neuroscientists believed that the adult brain was essentially fixed, its structure determined by genetics and early development. Once childhood ended, they thought, your brain stopped changing. You could learn new information, but the underlying neural architecture remained stable. Neurons that died were never replaced. Damage to the brain caused permanent deficits. This view, while comforting in its certainty, was fundamentally wrong. Over the past several decades, neuroscience has revealed that the brain remains remarkably plastic throughout life, continually reorganizing itself in response to experience, learning, injury, and environmental demands. This discovery, called neuroplasticity, has revolutionized understanding of the brain and opened new possibilities for treatment and enhancement. Neuroplasticity operates at multiple levels. At the smallest scale, individual synapses, the connections between neurons, strengthen or weaken based on activity. When you learn something new, specific patterns of neural activity occur. If those patterns repeat, the synapses involved strengthen through changes in their molecular structure, making those neural pathways more efficient. This process, called synaptic plasticity, represents the cellular basis of learning and memory. Long-term potentiation, a particular form of synaptic strengthening, involves persistent enhancement of signal transmission between neurons that fire together repeatedly. This phenomenon embodies Donald Hebb's famous principle: neurons that fire together, wire together. Conversely, synapses that aren't used weaken and may eventually disappear, a process called synaptic pruning. This pruning serves important functions, eliminating unnecessary connections and refining neural networks for greater efficiency. At a larger scale, new neural connections can grow through a process called synaptogenesis. Dendrites, the branching structures that receive signals from other neurons, can sprout new branches, creating new potential connection points. Axons, which carry signals away from neurons, can form new terminals. These structural changes allow for more extensive neural networks and greater information processing capacity. Perhaps most surprising, the adult brain can actually generate new neurons through neurogenesis. For decades, scientists believed this was impossible, that you were born with all the neurons you would ever have. Research in the 1990s shattered this dogma, revealing that new neurons continue to be born throughout life in at least two brain regions: the hippocampus, crucial for forming new memories, and the olfactory bulb, involved in smell. While neurogenesis in these regions doesn't approach the massive neuron production of development, it contributes to ongoing brain plasticity and function. The hippocampus, given its role in memory formation and spatial navigation, has been a particular focus of neuroplasticity research. A fascinating study of London taxi drivers revealed dramatic structural differences in their hippocampi compared to non-taxi drivers. London taxi drivers must memorize the bewilderingly complex layout of London streets, a process that takes years. Brain scans showed that taxi drivers had larger posterior hippocampi, with the size increase correlating with years of experience. Their brains had literally grown to accommodate the spatial information they'd learned. This study exemplifies experience-dependent plasticity, how specific experiences reshape specific brain regions. Musicians show enhanced auditory and motor cortex regions involved in their instrument. Jugglers show increased grey matter in regions processing visual motion. Meditation practitioners show enhanced regions involved in attention and emotional regulation. In each case, intensive practice in a particular domain strengthens the neural machinery supporting that domain. Critical periods represent times when the brain is especially plastic and sensitive to particular experiences. Language acquisition, for instance, occurs most readily during childhood. Children exposed to language naturally become fluent speakers. Adults learning a second language rarely achieve native-like proficiency, especially in pronunciation, because they're past the critical period for language. The brain's language regions become increasingly specialized and less flexible as this critical period closes. However, critical periods don't mean plasticity disappears after childhood. The adult brain remains capable of significant change, just at slower rates and with greater effort. This continuing plasticity allows adults to learn new skills, recover from injuries, and adapt to changing environments throughout life. Brain injury provides dramatic illustrations of neuroplasticity. When stroke or trauma damages brain regions, other regions can sometimes assume lost functions through reorganization. If motor cortex in the left hemisphere is damaged, causing right-sided weakness, the right motor cortex may take over some lost functions. Sensory regions adjacent to damaged areas may expand their representation, essentially colonizing unused neural territory. This reorganization isn't automatic or guaranteed. It requires intensive, repeated practice. Physical therapy following stroke, for instance, works by encouraging the formation of new neural pathways that bypass damaged areas. The same principles that allow learning, repeated activation of neural circuits, underlie recovery from brain injury. This understanding has led to new rehabilitation approaches, emphasizing intensive, task-specific training to maximize recovery. Neuroplasticity has a dark side too. Chronic pain can result from maladaptive plasticity, when neural pathways for pain become overactive, or when the brain's representation of body parts becomes distorted. Phantom limb pain, experienced by some amputees, reflects the brain's persistence in representing the missing limb. Drug addiction involves plasticity as well, with repeated drug use strengthening pathways connecting drug cues with reward, making addiction difficult to overcome. The discovery of neuroplasticity has practical implications for enhancing cognitive function and maintaining brain health. Mental exercise, like physical exercise, strengthens the brain. Learning new skills, engaging in cognitively demanding activities, and maintaining social connections all promote healthy brain aging. Physical exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, enhances neuroplasticity by increasing production of growth factors that support neuron survival and new synapse formation. Sleep plays crucial roles in brain plasticity. During sleep, particularly during deep sleep stages, the brain consolidates memories, transferring information from temporary storage in the hippocampus to long-term storage in the cortex. Sleep also allows for synaptic homeostasis, scaling down synaptic connections that were strengthened during waking, preventing neural networks from becoming oversaturated. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs neuroplasticity, hindering learning and memory. The fact that our brain continues changing throughout life carries profound implications. It means we're never locked into current patterns of thinking, feeling, or behaving. Change remains possible at any age. It also means that experiences matter. What we do, what we think, how we spend our time, all of these shape our brains in lasting ways. This knowledge empowers us to take active roles in shaping our own neural architecture through the choices we make and the experiences we seek. As sleep approaches and our conscious thoughts dissolve into the dream world, we might marvel at this 3-pound universe resting in our skulls, this dynamic, ever-changing organ that is simultaneously the tool we use to understand reality and the very essence of who we are. The plastic brain, continuously sculpting and resculpting itself in response to lived experience, represents both our greatest limitation and our most profound possibility. The science of flourishing, positive psychology, and human potential. For much of its history, psychology focused almost exclusively on what goes wrong in human experience. Researchers studied mental illness, dysfunction, and suffering. Therapists treated pathology. This negative focus was understandable. Suffering demands attention and relief. But Martin Seligman, upon becoming president of the American Psychological Association in 1998, challenged this exclusive focus on the negative. He proposed a new direction, positive psychology, a science dedicated to understanding what makes life worth living. Positive psychology doesn't deny that suffering exists or that treating pathology matters. Rather, it insists that understanding optimal functioning deserves equal attention. The absence of mental illness doesn't automatically produce well-being. A person can be free from depression, yet still unfulfilled, joyless, or stuck. Positive psychology asks, what does it mean to flourish? What enables humans to thrive? How can we move beyond mere survival to lives of meaning, engagement, and satisfaction? Seligman proposed that well-being comprises 5 elements, captured by the acronym PERMA. Positive emotions, the first element, involve more than momentary pleasure. While hedonic happiness, the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain, has its place, positive psychology emphasizes cultivating genuine positive emotions like joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love. These emotions don't just feel good. They broaden attention and cognition, making people more creative, open to new experiences, and better at problem solving. They build lasting personal resources, physical, intellectual, social, and psychological, that outlast the emotions themselves. Engagement, the second element, refers to psychological connection and absorption in activities. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a pioneer in positive psychology, identified flow, a state of complete absorption where self-consciousness disappears. Time seems to stop, and action merges seamlessly with awareness. Flow occurs when skills match challenge level. Too easy and you're bored, too hard and you're anxious. But when challenge slightly exceeds skill, requiring full concentration, yet remaining manageable, flow emerges. Flow states are deeply satisfying, providing sense of control and competence. Relationships, the third element, reflect humans' fundamentally social nature. Positive relationships, characterized by love, intimacy, emotional connection, and mutual support, profoundly influence well-being. People with strong social connections live longer, recover faster from illness, and report greater life satisfaction than socially isolated people. Quality matters more than quantity. A few deep, authentic relationships contribute more to well-being than numerous superficial connections. Meaning, the fourth element, involves belonging to and serving something larger than yourself. Meaning can come from many sources: family, work, religion, social causes, creative pursuits, or service to others. What matters is feeling that your life has purpose and significance, that your existence contributes to something beyond personal pleasure. Research shows that people who report high meaning in life demonstrate greater resilience, better mental health, and even longer lifespans than those lacking meaning. Accomplishment, the fifth element, involves pursuing excellence, mastery, or achievement for its own sake, independent of other benefits it might bring. Humans appear intrinsically motivated to develop competence, meet challenges, and achieve goals. This drive manifests across domains from academic performance to athletic excellence to artistic mastery. Accomplishment provides satisfaction, even when it doesn't produce pleasure, social connection, or meaning, though it often does provide these other elements as well. Beyond PERMA, positive psychology has explored numerous topics that contribute to flourishing. Character strengths, those positive traits that enable excellence and fulfillment, have received extensive attention. Researchers identified 24 character strengths organized under 6 broad virtues: wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. These include strengths like creativity, curiosity, judgment, bravery, persistence, kindness, fairness, leadership, forgiveness, humility, appreciation of beauty, gratitude, hope, humor, and spirituality. Everyone possesses all 24 strengths to varying degrees, but individuals typically have signature strengths. Those strengths, highest in their personal profile and most central to their identity. Research suggests that identifying and using signature strengths more frequently increases happiness and decreases depression. Interventions. Encouraging people to use signature strengths in new ways each day produce lasting benefits to well-being. Gratitude, the appreciation of goodness in life, emerges as particularly powerful for enhancing well-being. Grateful people report higher life satisfaction, more positive emotions, better physical health, and stronger relationships. Gratitude interventions, simple practices like keeping a daily gratitude journal or writing gratitude letters to people who've influenced your life positively, reliably, increase happiness. The mechanism appears to involve shifting attention from what's lacking to what's present, from problems to blessings, creating a more positive outlook. Optimism, expecting positive future outcomes, also contributes to well-being. Optimists cope better with stress, persist longer in pursuing goals, and enjoy better physical and mental health than pessimists. However, the relationship is nuanced. Realistic optimism, positive expectations grounded in accurate assessment of situations, serves better than unrealistic optimism that ignores genuine obstacles. The former promotes effective coping and persistence. The latter may lead to disappointment and poor preparation. Resilience, the capacity to bounce back from adversity, represents another key focus. Resilient people don't avoid difficulties or feel less distressed initially. Rather, they recover more quickly and completely, sometimes even experiencing post-traumatic growth, becoming stronger through adversity. Factors promoting resilience include optimism, social support, purpose and meaning, cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation skills, and ability to find benefits even in negative experiences. Mindfulness, paying attention to present moment experience without judgment, has been integrated into positive psychology from contemplative traditions. Mindfulness practices reduce stress and anxiety, improve emotional regulation, enhance focus and attention, and increase overall well-being. By training attention to rest in the present rather than ruminating about past or worrying about future, mindfulness creates psychological space and reduces unnecessary suffering caused by mental time travel. Self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer a good friend, contrasts with self-criticism's harsh judgment. Contrary to fears that self-compassion promotes complacency, research shows it actually enhances motivation, resilience, and well-being. People high in self-compassion recover better from failures, persist longer in pursuing goals, and experience less anxiety and depression than highly self-critical people. Positive psychology has been criticized for potential cultural bias, as much research was conducted with Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations. Critics also warn against toxic positivity, the insistence on maintaining positive attitudes regardless of circumstances, which can invalidate genuine suffering. Positive psychology at its best acknowledges that negative emotions serve important functions, and that authentic well-being sometimes requires experiencing and processing difficult feelings rather than suppressing them with forced optimism. Despite these valid critiques, positive psychology has enriched psychology by balancing attention between pathology and flourishing, expanding the field's scope beyond treating illness to cultivating wellness. It offers practical, evidence-based strategies that anyone can implement to enhance their own well-being, from keeping gratitude journals to identifying and using signature strengths to practicing mindfulness and self-compassion. As drowsiness deepens and thoughts become dreamlike, we might contemplate what contributes to our own well-being. What brings us joy? When do we experience flow? Which relationships nourish us? What provides meaning and purpose? What accomplishments bring satisfaction? Answering these questions isn't mere self-indulgence, but rather reflects psychology's highest aspiration. Understanding not just how to survive, but how to thrive. Not just how to avoid misery, but how to create lives of fulfillment, connection, and meaning. The patterns that define us. Personality psychology. Throughout this evening's journey through psychology's landscape, we've explored many aspects of human nature: how we think, how we develop, how we relate to others, how we heal, how our brains change, and how we flourish. Yet one question remains: why are people so different from one another? Why does the same situation produce such varied responses across individuals? This is the domain of personality psychology, the study of enduring patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that distinguish individuals from one another. Personality psychology has produced numerous theories and frameworks for understanding individual differences. Among the most influential is the five-factor model, often called the Big Five. This model emerged from decades of research using a fascinating approach called the lexical hypothesis. The hypothesis proposes that important individual differences become encoded in language. If a characteristic matters in human affairs, languages develop words to describe it. By analyzing thousands of personality descriptive words, researchers identified recurring themes that cluster into five broad dimensions. The first dimension, openness to experience, describes the breadth and depth of someone's mental life. People high in openness are curious, imaginative, aesthetically sensitive, and comfortable with novelty and complexity. They enjoy abstract thinking, appreciate art and beauty, and seek out new experiences. People low in openness prefer familiar routines, concrete over abstract thinking, and traditional over novel approaches. Neither end of the spectrum is inherently better. High openness supports creativity and adaptability. Low openness supports focus and efficiency. The second dimension, conscientiousness, reflects organization, self-discipline, and goal-directed behavior. Highly conscientious people are organized, reliable, hardworking, and careful. They plan ahead, follow through on commitments, and control impulses. People low in conscientiousness are more spontaneous, flexible, and casual about obligations. They may procrastinate and have difficulty following through on plans. Conscientiousness consistently predicts achievement in school and work, health behaviors, and longevity. The third dimension, extroversion, captures energy, assertiveness, and sociability. Extroverts are outgoing, talkative, and energized by social interaction. They seek excitement and stimulation. Introverts, at the other end, are reserved, independent, and energized by solitude. They prefer quiet environments and small groups to parties and crowds. Extroversion influences career choices, social network size, emotional expression, and well-being, though both extroverts and introverts can be equally happy. The fourth dimension, agreeableness, reflects interpersonal warmth and cooperation. Agreeable people are kind, trusting, empathic, and eager to help others. They value harmony and avoid conflict. People low in agreeableness are more skeptical, competitive, and direct in expressing disagreement. They prioritize truth over tact. Agreeableness affects relationship quality, teamwork, and conflict resolution, but may relate to difficulty asserting personal needs. The fifth dimension, neuroticism, describes emotional stability versus instability. People high in neuroticism experience negative emotions, anxiety, worry, and stress more frequently and intensely than emotionally stable people. They react more strongly to threats and frustrations. People low in neuroticism remain calm, even-tempered, and resilient under stress. Neuroticism strongly predicts mental health, with high neuroticism increasing vulnerability to anxiety and depression. These five dimensions aren't types or categories. Everyone falls somewhere on each dimension's continuum. You might be moderately extroverted, highly conscientious, moderately agreeable, low in neuroticism, and high in openness. This particular profile would differ from someone high in extroversion, low in conscientiousness, high in agreeableness, high in neuroticism, and low in openness. The number of possible combinations is vast, contributing to personality's infinite variety. The Big Five shows remarkable stability across the lifespan. Your personality in childhood predicts your personality decades later, though gradual changes do occur. People generally become slightly more conscientious and agreeable and less neurotic as they age, changes that contribute to the greater emotional stability often seen in older adults. Both genes and environment influence personality. Twin studies suggest that roughly 40 to 60% of personality variation has genetic basis. The remaining variation reflects environmental influences, though surprisingly, shared family environment matters little. Siblings raised in the same family often develop quite different personalities. Non-shared environmental factors, unique experiences each person has, appear more influential than shared family experiences. Personality influences life outcomes. Conscientiousness predicts academic and occupational success, health behaviors, and longevity. Emotional stability predicts relationship satisfaction and mental health. Extroversion influences social network size and some aspects of well-being. Openness relates to creativity and political attitudes. Agreeableness affects relationship quality and pro-social behavior. However, personality doesn't determine destiny. Context matters enormously. Situations can override personality. Even highly introverted people can act extroverted when the situation demands. Strong situations, those with clear expectations and consequences, reduce personality's influence by constraining behavior. Weak situations, with ambiguous expectations, allow personality fuller expression. Understanding your own personality provides self-knowledge useful for making decisions. If you're highly introverted, choosing a career requiring constant public speaking and networking might create chronic stress. If you're low in conscientiousness, you might benefit from external structure and accountability. If you're high in neuroticism, learning emotion regulation skills becomes particularly important. Yet personality is just one piece of the puzzle that is you. You are also your values, your goals, your roles, your relationships, your culture, your history, your biology, and your consciousness experiencing this very moment. Personality provides broad strokes, tendencies, and inclinations, but human beings possess agency, the capacity to act in ways that transcend temperamental inclinations. As sleep draws near and consciousness begins its nightly dissolution, we might hold this paradox. We are both consistent and changing, both constrained by enduring patterns and capable of growth and transformation. Personality grounds us in recognizable patterns while leaving space for the unpredictability and possibility that makes human existence endlessly fascinating. The sleeping mind, a conclusion and an invitation. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, though perhaps you're already drifting beyond words into that borderland between waking and sleeping, where thoughts become images and logic surrenders to dream. That's perfectly fine. In fact, it's ideal. This entire exploration was designed not for memorization, but for accompaniment, something to occupy your attention gently while your body and mind transition toward the restorative oblivion of sleep. If you're still awake, listening to these words, notice your breathing now. Notice how it's perhaps slower, deeper, more rhythmic than when we began. Notice the weight of your body, how it seems to sink into whatever supports it. Notice how thoughts come and go without effort, drifting like clouds across an empty sky. Psychology, this vast and intricate science we've toured tonight, ultimately concerns itself with the most intimate aspects of existence, your inner life, the thoughts and feelings and experiences that make you who you are. From the molecular mechanisms in individual synapses to the grand patterns of personality, from the earliest moments of development to the final stages of life, from the private struggles of clinical suffering to the heights of human flourishing, psychology seeks to understand the full spectrum of human experience. What we've covered tonight represents merely an introduction, a sampler of psychology's vast territories. Each topic we touched upon, cognitive processes, developmental stages, social influences, therapeutic approaches, brain plasticity, positive psychology, personality dimensions. Each of these could fill volumes, has filled volumes, with researchers dedicating entire careers to understanding small corners of these larger domains. But you need not become a psychologist to benefit from psychological knowledge. Simply living mindfully, observing your own mental processes, noticing how situations influence behavior, appreciating your own growth and change, cultivating well-being, understanding your personality's patterns, All of these applications bring psychology's insights into daily life. As you lie here on the edge of sleep, you embody many of the phenomena we've discussed. Your working memory is winding down, releasing its grip on current concerns. Memories of the day are beginning their consolidation process, transferring from temporary to longer-term storage. Your emotional state has hopefully shifted from day's stresses toward evening's calm. Your consciousness is beginning its nightly transformation, moving from focused wakefulness through drowsiness into the altered states of sleep. Sleep itself, that mysterious process consuming a third of human life, remains imperfectly understood despite intensive research. We know that sleep involves distinct stages cycling through the night. We know it's essential for memory consolidation, emotional regulation, physical restoration, and countless physiological processes. We know that chronic sleep deprivation impairs cognition, mood, and health. But the full story of why we sleep, what consciousness is doing during sleep, and what dreams mean, all of this remains partially mysterious, one of psychology and neuroscience's enduring puzzles. Perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the mystery of sleep reminds us that despite psychology's remarkable progress in understanding the mind, much remains unknown. The brain, consciousness, subjective experience, these are extraordinarily difficult to study precisely because they're simultaneously the tools we use for investigation and the subjects being investigated. The eye cannot fully see itself. Yet this mystery needn't trouble you now. Let the questions dissolve. Let the information we've explored drift away like morning mist. What remains is simply this moment, this breath, this gradual relaxation into sleep's embrace. If you found this exploration enjoyable, helpful, or interesting, consider subscribing to the channel. Like this video if you appreciated the journey we've taken together. Your support helps create more content like this, gentle explorations of fascinating topics designed to accompany you toward rest. But these practical matters can wait. Right now, simply rest. Allow yourself to let go of the day's concerns, to release the grip on conscious thought, to trust in sleep's restorative power. Your mind and body know what to do. You need not try to sleep. Simply allow it to happen, naturally, easily, inevitably. The landscape of psychology we've toured tonight will be here tomorrow, vast and intricate, waiting for further exploration if you're interested. But tonight, let it all go. Let understanding fade into peaceful unknowing. Let the fascinating complexity of human nature dissolve into the beautiful simplicity of rest. Sleep well, dream sweetly, and may you wake refreshed, renewed, ready to engage with the world and with your own remarkable mind once more. Good night.